Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. Americans pay twice as much per capita for health care as the average in other modern industrial nations. But the World Health Organization ranks us only 37th in health outcomes, and our life expectancy is only 42 in the world. Why the disparity between cost and results? Other nations design their healthcare systems to produce good health. The U.S. system is designed to produce big profits for insurance, pharmaceutical, and hospital companies. Single payer, essentially Medicare for everybody, would replace health insurance companies with a streamlined solution. Medicare's administrative overhead is about 3%, but private insurance companies waste about 25%. The savings would be enough to provide health care for everyone who lacks it now. But insurance companies have bribed Congress through many millions of dollars in campaign contributions, so Congress is more responsive to big business than to the American people. Therefore, the bills moving through both the House and the Senate in mid-October as we tape this program are offering only weak protections for the public health, but strong profits for the insurance companies. The insurance companies' massive donations to politicians make the healthcare crisis a teachable moment for why we need campaign finance reform. And so this month's TV program explores the relationship between healthcare reform and campaign finance reform. The problems are very closely linked. And so are the solutions. If we would reform our corrupt and inefficient campaign financing system, we could reform our unjust and inefficient healthcare system. And we have two guests who are working on these issues, and they will share their knowledge and their insights with us. I am happy to welcome Craig Salins. He's with Washington Public Campaigns, and Dr. David Bond, who's with Doctors for America and Physicians for a National Health Plan. Good to have you both here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's start, Craig, with looking at the problems that we have with our current way of financing election campaigns. What problems do you see in having big private donations carrying the load?
Well, Glenn, essentially we've got a situation now where because campaigns are financed privately, lawmaking or public policy in this country too often becomes skewed in the direction of the interests of those who are paying the bill, which is large campaign financiers, corporate contributions, and so forth. Unless we change that system, our group feels that we will never really make significant progress on a number of issues, including health care and other issues that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah. You had a conversation with Congressman Jim McDermott, who himself is a physician. Tell us his approach.
Well, he lamented the dilemma of any congressman who, as soon as he's elected, needs to start raising money for his next campaign in just 2 years, so that it costs over $1 million to run that campaign, and large contributions from wealthy corporations are a lot easier to get than small contributions from lots of individual voters.
And when we were talking on the phone to prepare the program, you also mentioned that McDermott had said that it focuses on the short term of the immediate fundraising instead of the long term about what's good, smart public policy.
If your vision is limited to 2-year increments, it's tough to plan for a social change that may take 5 to 10 years to really get right.
Yeah. In contrast with financing election campaigns with private money, including the big bucks from the special interests, a lot of people are calling for public financing, and they're calling the public option clean elections or voter-owned elections. And I wonder if you could describe that concept, and we'll get into the specifics later, but just the concept of
Sure.
clean elections, voter-owned elections.
Well, Glenn, a number of other countries actually do this, and this is a concept that was pioneered in the late 1990s in several other states, in the state of Maine and in Arizona, and now there are about 7 states that do this. Essentially, candidates that want to run for office, whether they are incumbents or whether they are challengers, have a way that they can demonstrate community support, and then they are actually given a check. They are given a sum of money to run their campaign, and they agree in accepting those funds that they will take no more contributions privately, that they will run their campaigns only on the public funds. The difference is then who essentially is financing the campaign is the voters or the general population, not any special interest.
Right.
It's been demonstrated to work quite well.
Right, and that's after, like you say, after they've demonstrated enough support for the community by people like signing a petition or making like $10 contributions, just so that it's not going to frivolous candidates.
That's exactly right. In every case where a program like this has been created, what has to happen is a public fund is created. In the state of Maine, for example, it's created by the state, by the legislature, and funds are set aside. Candidates qualify for that public financing by being able to gather signatures from voters in their district, where each signature is backed by exactly $5. So if I wanted to run that way, I would have to collect 200 signatures and $5 from each one of those persons. Those signatures are then validated, and then essentially I form a contract with the program or with the state that I will run my campaign only on the funds that I've been given. Not just the $5, but a sum of money that is worked out by the terms of the program.
Right, and I know they've got formulas for how to make it fair for the different offices.
Exactly.
And now, there's big money in our healthcare system, and I know you've got some information on this that you can show the viewers on the screen. You've studied the role of big money in our healthcare mess that we currently have, and a lot of the money that people are paying for healthcare is not really delivering healthcare services. And I wonder if you could tell us where our dollars are going and show us the visual that will illustrate that.
Well, it's been documented that approximately $300 billion per year go into private for-profit healthcare insurance administration. There are these other categories that we would see, and some we would be familiar with, like drug company marketing or the lobbying and political contributions. One area of waste that I was unfamiliar with was something called denial management. And as you can see, there's $20 billion a year that are spent in that. What that is, 30% of private claims are denied the first time. So the insurance company has to spend money training their employees and having computerized systems and software to implement that plan. Then the hospitals and doctors have to have their support staff trained in how to combat this process of submitting appeals and finding out what works and what doesn't. So there's this incredibly wasteful game of trying to deny payment for care.
And that means then that part of the healthcare dollars that people with private insurance are paying is paying the insurance companies to hire people to fight against the patient's interests.
And it's paying the doctor's fee that is higher than it needs to be because the doctor has this overhead to try to counteract that.
So I'm seeing a parallel between the issues you folks are working on. The doctor has to take time away from treating patients in order to fight with insurance company bureaucracy. Politicians need to take time away from serving the constituents in order to raise money from fat cats. And in both cases, they're diverting their attention and their energies away from what they should be doing. I mean,
Exactly.
it seems like a real parallel between those.
Yeah, Glenn, that's exactly right. Sometimes known as dialing for dollars or romancing the big donors. It's there's a better way. There's a better mousetrap, and that's why we really need to reform the system that way.
Yeah, and part of the money that we have goes to the salaries of these high-ranking, these chief executive officers. And I ran across this, I think it was on your website, Craig, which was fascinating. The top 10 chief executive officer salaries in healthcare companies that were like $24 million to one guy every year. And another guy was getting over 12 million. Another guy was getting 9.8 million, or that was a gal. Next person was getting 9 million, and the other's almost 9. I mean, this is enormous salaries for just one person each. And that's part of where, I mean, it would take like a whole community of healthcare customers, insurance customers, just to pay the salary of the top person in their company.
And the point I would make is the skills exerted by those people are not quantum different than what the director of Medicare would make, who would make less than 100th or 1,000th of that income.
Yeah.
The same administrative knowledge and leadership skills.
Right. And of course, none of these people are seeing patients. You're a doctor. You actually help people with their health problems. And these folks are just running a giant business. You have another graphic that lays out what we are paying for, and you can show us this one?
Well, it's become more publicly discussed, the $2.4 trillion per year that Americans spend on healthcare. What I wanted to highlight in this graphic is that 60% of that expense is already paid for out of public funds, whether we're talking about Medicare or Medicaid, S-CHIP, the Indian Health Service, the VA.
Yeah, the Veterans Administration.
And so who are we already paying for? The most expensive health care. The elderly, the young and the poor, and the people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. So the remaining 40% that generates that $300 billion a year for the for-profit health insurance industry is only addressing the most healthy segment of our population. Uh-huh. And we hear the scare stories about how much health reform would cost of $1.2 trillion over 10 years, and everyone thinks that's horrendous. If you look at these figures of $300 billion a year in healthcare administration, that's over $3 trillion over 10 years. Yeah. So we're already spending the money, but we're not allowing the public funding to function like a business would, compete for lower costs of drugs, negotiate with hospitals for global budgeting, and all of the other things where there's huge amounts of money to be saved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty astounding because people take some numbers, but they don't take the whole thing in context as you're doing. So thanks for that. What are some other problems that we have with the way healthcare is organized and delivered and inadequately delivered in this country?
Well, it's the fragmentation that's been the biggest problem from my perspective. You have tried to cater to so many different interests who may not have the primary goal of delivering healthcare services. So the politicians, or one comparison I would make to the campaign financing is they wouldn't keep giving the money to the politicians if it didn't work. Mm-hmm. When I was in private practice, I didn't think I was influenced by drug company representatives who would bring lunch to my staff or an occasional conference at a nice hotel. But since I've been practicing and not exposed to that, I'm aware that I'm a much more cost-effective prescriber, and I was subtly but effectively influenced. Same thing happens in Congress, so that if we can remove that influence that has nothing to do with the science of healthcare, then I think we can make a huge improvement, not just in cost, but quality and safety.
Yeah, I think you would use the term evidence-based. Tell us with that concept.
There's finally a more of a concerted effort in medicine to critically examine its own practices. What evidence do we have that a treatment really works? Does this surgery do someone good? How well are we doing in certain disease management? So we separate it from tradition, custom, as well as the influence of the market on this drug, should be better. Ask your doctor about that.
Yeah.
When a generic may work just as well.
And you know that the reason that those drug manufacturers can advertise on TV so much is because they're making these big profits, and that it works to put those ads on TV, because then people go to you and say, give me this medicine, this particular brand name.
And we're only one of 2 countries in the world that allow direct-to-consumer marketing of drugs.
Yeah, I was amazed that other countries have enough sense to realize that that's a corrupting influence, and
Yeah.
it wastes money. But they have systems where the government is paying attention to cost saving, and the
Exactly.
government is not geared toward maximizing profit for private corporations like our system is. So Congress is doing this thing. As we are taping this program now in mid-October, things are kind of working their way through. But you're urging a single payer system where you'd have massive streamlining instead of all the redundancy of all the different health insurance company claim forms and rules and exclusions and the da 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 da. There'd be a streamlined system of less overhead. And how do you see single payer as solving some of the problems that are existing in the system?
I became a more firm advocate when I practiced in Australia and New Zealand for 3 years and saw how a single payer system can work and can coexist with private insurance. The patients had full choice of doctors, nobody lost their doctors, but the doctors had one primary source to send their bills to, and that was a publicly funded, privately run organization. My overhead in private practice was 60 to 70%. In Australia and New Zealand, it's 30 to 40%. So huge savings in the primary care sector. It also allowed budgeting for the predictable expenses that are so expensive in the US. Example I would give is, we know based on the age and population of Olympia how many bypass surgeries we will need. So we could budget for that. But in the fee-for-service private insurance model, and even our current government funding fee-for-service, the more procedures you do, the more money you make, even if you don't make as much per procedure as you would like. So in a publicly funded system, we would be able to say, we have the science to know how many we need. There wouldn't be an economic pressure on the doctor or on the hospital to try to do more procedures for less clear-cut reasons. And that would, again, improve safety, improve outcomes, and save money.
Yeah. In talking about how to get there, some people have talked about the concept of like Medicare for everybody, because people love Medicare. I mean, anybody who's on Medicare, I've never heard anybody say, I qualify for Medicare, and boy, I wish I could get rid of that. They all love it. And if we think of single payer as Medicare for everybody, some people have said, why don't they just take the qualifying age and drop it a few years, so like at 60 you can qualify, and then at 55 you can qualify, and then at 50 and so forth. But start with kids. Let kids, anybody under 18 or 21, qualify first, and then drop the age down until everybody's covered, so that you can ease into it. And that just seems like a very sensible thing that it would seem that the American people would support, without all the fear and rhetoric that's out there.
That's the model that's most understandable to people, and it would also give the opportunity to have the pool of money to fund health care in more quality-oriented means rather than the traditional fee-for-service assembly line model.
Yeah. And you hear arguments against single-payer health care, it's a government takeover, and you've kind of addressed that already by saying, look how the government already is doing, Medicare and the Veterans Administration health care and Medicaid for low-income folks. There are other concerns, other arguments against single payer that we hear?
Some of the most common ones, I think it's high time to change some of the jargon. Rationing comes up. Everyone imagines World War II, you get a sticker for how much gasoline you can get.
Yeah.
That's not what occurs. I would love to have a movement where journalists realizes they're misusing the language.
Yeah.
What happens in every country is triage, and what needs to happen is conservation of resources for necessary care.
Right. But we have rationing now, but it's done by the insurance companies. The insurance companies say, we don't want to pay for those procedures. Or I have a friend who, she needed a root canal, and she had to wait for a year because she's very poor, and she had to take about a year to find relatives who could lend her the $1,000 that she needed for the root canal. So we have rationing now, but it's done on the basis of economic class.
Well, again, I want to ban the word. I want to say that we're currently having denial management is what they're doing.
Yeah.
And instead, if we have appropriate triage of when do you need your hip replacement, and again, this is a fear tactic related to chronic disease decisions. There's no rationing if you show up in an emergency room with a heart attack.
Yeah.
There's no rationing if your child has meningitis in any country in the world that has a national health plan, in Canada, in England, or whatever. So for acute, life-threatening care, there's appropriate triage.
Yeah, yeah. It seems as though the healthcare reform is kind of like the poster child for why we need to reform our electoral campaign financing. Because when people are putting these things out, and you look at where all the pressure, the money going into Congress, and the lobbying and the campaign donations, the American people agree with you actually on wanting real health care and not domination by insurance company bureaucrats and the runaround and all the stuff that people get. But Congress is stymied or stymieing us. And I think somebody had used the term poster child. Did that come from your organization? Tell us about that concept.
Glenn, it did. Well, it's just recognizing that in order for us to make real progress on changing some of the things that Dr. Bond talks about and moving towards real healthcare reform, we are going to have to reform how our campaigns are financed. Because I think what we're seeing is that's our current system of private contributions. One way to look at it is big money flows in and political favors flow out. As long as we have that kind of corruption or bribery, depending on what side you're sitting on, we probably will not really get the kind of public policy that we need in healthcare or in a lot of other ways. There's a real good example of this. People may remember back in the years 2000, 2001, and 2002 when Medicare Part D was being debated in the Congress, the prescription drug benefit. And what we saw during those 2 years was the amount of lobbying money literally doubled from the pharmaceutical industry for about 2 years. And then once that law was passed, it went back down to where it had been before. What was in the law that the lobbyists were so interested in? They wanted a provision that our U.S. government could not negotiate for lower drug prices with the drug companies. And for all the lobbying money that they spent, they got that provision. That provision in Medicare Part D was worth hundreds of millions of dollars in additional sales. So it's an example of how lawmaking in this country is skewed by how our campaigns are financed.
And I think another reason it would be considered the poster child is the money in contributions and lobbying greatly dwarfs any other issue-focused contribution. So that the insurance companies, the hospital corporations, the drug companies are spending more on lobbying and in political contributions than any other interest group for any other issue.
Okay, yeah. Well, I have some information here of healthcare industry influence in Congress in 2008. This is contributions and lobbying expenses. And you can see the top row is hospitals and nursing homes, 96, almost $97 million in lobbying costs, over $22 million in campaign contributions, and a bit more going to Democrats than to Republicans. I think they could see the handwriting on the wall as the 2008 election was coming up and probably wanted to reward the people they thought were going to win.
Exactly.
Because those things do flex according to which party is in power or seems to be coming to power. Next row below that, insurance spent over $153 million in lobbying in Congress in 2008, and $46 million in campaign contributions, and that tilted a bit more toward Republicans, 55% Republicans to 45% Democrats. Healthcare or health services and HMOs, 62 million in lobbying, 13 million. I mean, you get the idea. And the pharmaceutical down below, 152 million in lobbying and over 15 million in campaign contributions. So these folks are getting big returns on their investments, as you mentioned. I mean, it pays off for them to do that. And they do that at the expense of the American people, both as health consumers and as citizens and taxpayers.
Yeah.
And if you could total up all those amounts and again project that will continue to occur over 10 years,
Right.
Why don't we hear a hue and cry of how many billions of dollars are being spent of our health care premiums that don't go to health care services?
Right, and we hear how much it would cost to cover everybody, but we don't hear the numbers from these.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's not just a coincidence. It may have to do with the fact that mainstream media are owned by giant corporations as well. Tell us about the federal level of reforming campaign financing, the Fair Elections Now Act.
Sure.
Tell us, can you summarize what it would do and how that would solve the problem?
Sure. Well, Glenn, the good news is that there are bills that have now been introduced in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House that would create programs of public financing to run for the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House. Incidentally, I'm sure we'll mention this again. This information is on our website, which is washclean.org.
Yeah, I think it's one of the funniest website names. Is Washington, we want clean elections, and you want to wash that stuff clean.
Well, and that's partly why I didn't choose it, but that's partly why the early pioneers of our group did choose it. The chart that you just held up, for example, is on our website if people want to take a look. Here's how the federal bill would work. We need to remember that the average cost for a winning United States Senate seat right now is $10 million. And you might say to yourself, who has that kind of money? And the answer is the insurance industry or the pharmaceutical industry or the really big players. These folks who are in office or who want to get into office have to raise that kind of money. If you do the math, it works out to around $27,000 or $28,000 every day that they have to raise. The bills that are in Congress, it's called the Fair Elections Now Act. There's a companion in the House and a companion in the Senate.
And I've got those numbers. You probably have them memorized. I have to check my notes to get the numbers, but it's S752 and HR 1826.
Exactly, in the Senate and in the House. And again, those are on our website.
Yeah.
The source of the money to pay for the public financing would come from a new tax on large federal contractors.
That's good.
If you think about it, I mean, these are the guys that are paying the money now to try to buy influence in Congress.
So it's recycling that money that they're getting from us taxpayers anyway, but for a better purpose.
For a better purpose. In order for this legislation to pass, here's what it's going to take. We've got to create a groundswell, a tidal wave, a public movement, letting our lawmakers know that we would like them to vote for these bills. As of last night, it's mid-October right now, the number of co-sponsors on that bill in the House, the Fair Elections Now Act, was actually up to 102 co-sponsors.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So it's climbing every week. Now, in our state, we've got 9 United States members of Congress.
In the House.
In the House. 2 of them, Congressman McDermott in the 7th District of Seattle and Congressman Adam Smith from the 9th District, have both already agreed to be co-sponsors. But as of today, mid-October, the rest of our legislators have not yet agreed to co-sponsor the bills.
And probably most of the people watching the program live in the 3rd District because our program covers Thurston County, and Brian Barrett is a representative in the 3rd District, and he has not signed on as a co-sponsor. And he probably needs to hear from the people watching the program.
Well, I think it'd be great if tomorrow morning after people see this show, if they call his office and ask if he's agreed yet to co-sponsor the Fair Elections Now Act, and if the answer is no, he is not, ask him why not.
Right. And so this would operate the way that you described earlier in the program, where there is a pot of federal money that's available, you qualify as a serious candidate in some way, and then this covers campaign costs up to a certain limit as long as you agree not to take private donations after you first qualify.
Actually,
is it that sense of it?
Yeah, there's a one-page document on our website. It's on the resources page of our website that explains how it would work in any given state. It's a little different than in Maine or Arizona, but basically candidates would, once they qualify, they would have to qualify to receive the money by showing a certain amount of support already from voters in their district, including monetary contributions. But the contributions that they could accept would be limited to small amounts, $100. And once they'd raised a certain amount of money that way, they would then qualify for the U.S. Senate, for a Senate race, for up to $3.5 million initially for a Senate race. And eventually they could get up to $10 million for a complete race, including the primary and the general. I think the point, though, we don't want to get stuck on the weeds on this. The point is we need public financing of these campaigns.
Well,
that's the point.
And I think it works out because the public would then be able to see, okay, there are 2 people running for this office. This one has taken money from the oil companies and the tobacco companies and the weapons manufacturers and the polluters and the insurance companies and all these other folks. And this person has said, no, I'm not going to take contributions from any of those fat cats. I'm running a clean campaign on just the public money. People will choose that one. And that's been the experience in states that have done this at the state level, is that people are running on the clean money approach. Voters do pay attention, and those folks have a good record of winning.
Well, they actually win. I think the best example is Shortly after the state of Maine instituted their clean elections program, Maine became the first state in the nation that by state law brought down the price of prescription drugs. And a lot of people wondered, how could they do this? And the answer is they did it because they could do it. The legislators were no longer reliant on that private large money for their re-election campaigns, and so they could literally stare down the lobbyists and stare down the special. It's important to note, by the way, under a clean elections system or public financing of campaigns, lobbyists don't go away. There will still be lobbyists. The money is not going to go away. The difference is that lawmakers are no longer beholden to that money.
And they
That's
also,
the difference.
Right, and they also can pay attention to the voters and the regular citizens because they don't have to spend all their time meeting with fundraising fat cats.
Dialing for dollars.
So it's a whole different thing. But it really does work, and the voters do pay attention. So
And the other difference is because the barriers to running for office are brought down. In the states that have these programs, we're seeing more women run and win, more minorities run and win, and importantly, more people run for office and win from a variety of economic strata. We're no longer seeing just wealthy lawyers, for example, in office.
I think one of the other things that's helpful in thinking about the cost is how much does the current system cost us in tax breaks for giant corporations, in pork barrel projects that serve campaign donors, in wasteful weapon systems that the Pentagon doesn't even want, but the Congress keeps funding because the contributions go into their campaigns. I mean, I'm sure we must be spending a lot of money on a taxpayer by taxpayer basis because of our current corruption in our system that we would save if we had an efficient and honest campaign system.
We really would. Sometimes,
and certainly in healthcare, I don't have much tolerance for the complaints that we can't afford healthcare reform when we're spending so much on elections the way we do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, these things really are tied in a similar logic. I think pertains and interacts. We're running a bit late, but I want to make sure that we cover this judicial bill. We had this nasty experience in 2006 in Washington State when special interests essentially tried to buy several state Supreme Court justice campaigns. Tell us what the judicial bill would be doing. It was introduced in the 2009 legislature, but it's still alive for the 2010 session. So tell us what that bill would do.
Well, Glenn, you sort of mentioned it. We're seeing trends now where even elections to the courts have become subject to big money influence. Not every state elects their judges, but when judges are elected, we should pay attention to where they get their money to run for office. And in Washington State, our judges are elected. So there's a bill that's been introduced in the House by Representative Marco Lias, and in the Senate by Senator Eric Omig. This is in our State House and State Senate. And it would establish a program in Washington State for public financing as an option for races for the Supreme Court. We should stress that whenever there's public financing available, it's not mandatory for candidates. Candidates can choose to either accept that or not. But we'd like to create a program where candidates for our state Supreme Court, the highest court in the state, can run on public money. It really matters. I've had people say to me, well, Craig, the courts, gosh, I don't even think about the courts. They don't matter. But when you think about it, the courts do matter. They rule on land use. They rule on growth management. They rule on labor and environmental safety and all kinds of things.
Well, everything that's a matter for the public, for the government, for any aspect of our lives, things come back, things end up in court cases.
Now we saw, in 2006, we saw an over-the-top spending. There was over $4 million that was spent in this state on 3 races for the Supreme Court in 2006. Much of that money spent by special interests.
Right.
In 2008, the amount spent was a lot lower, but that's because some of those special interests were spending all their money on the governor's race. We are guessing that in 2010, once again, 3 candidates will be up for the 3 seats for the Supreme Court. I'm guessing we're going to see another over-the-top spending on that.
And these things really are an issue. In the research I did, including materials from your organization, there was a case in a situation in West Virginia where a coal company had given $3 million to a judge's campaign, and then the judge ruled favorably for the coal company on a case. And there's some people in Louisiana had done some research and found that over a 14-year period, Louisiana's Supreme Court justices ruled in favor of litigants who had contributed to their campaigns, and that was even after they had controlled for the variable about whether these judges tend to support plaintiffs or defendants and so forth. They factored that stuff out, and it still seemed to be a very clear bias for the Louisiana State Supreme Court justices in giving decisions to their donors.
One of the disturbing aspects to it is it may be one thing that if a judge is running, receives a contribution, feels influenced, but it may go back even farther than that a judge may not have an interest in running unless he's encouraged by a special interest to run with the assurances of support because the special interest knows he has a certain political bent.
Yeah, so it
That's
does
that's
skew
really Glenn, Dr. Bond, thanks for bringing that out, because I think that makes a very important point. It's not as simple as votes of lawmakers being purchased by big money. It's that large special interests are able to encourage certain candidates who already think certain ways to run for office and to be elected, and to discourage other people from running for office because they can't get the financing to do it.
Right. Tell us just a bit about the local option. In 2008, your organization and other people got the legislature in Washington to support a bill that would let local governments create public funding.
That's correct, and this lots of people around the state helped get this through. It was really a success story for citizen lobbying, which we need more of, by the way. But in Washington state, it had become illegal in 1992 for cities or counties or ports or local jurisdictions to establish local programs of running for city council. We were able in 2008 to get what we call our local option law passed through the legislature. Essentially what it does is it grants permission to cities or counties or ports to establish local public financing programs for city council or mayor. Seattle actually had such a program back in 1978, and that program ran very successfully for about 10 years, and then it was overturned in 1992. So now local cities have the opportunity, once again, if they want to create these local programs. And we hope it will happen. We're very aware that there's kind of an economic malaise temporarily in the country. Maybe it'll be over soon, but we hope that cities and counties will take advantage of this opportunity.
Well, and using what I had said before, where in the long run we really save by having, I'm sure we would save if we had public financing of electoral campaigns, because we'd be saving a lot of the waste that is now being spent for special interests, and the tax breaks that special interests are able to finagle for themselves, that shifts the tax burden onto us. So if we could clean up the elections, I think the taxpayers would save in the long run.
We really would. I've had people say to me, I'm sure you have too, that, well, I'm not sure, Craig, that I want to pay for this as a taxpayer. And my response is, you're paying for it now.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Anyway, Bill Moyers likes to say the cost of corruption is passed on to us. We all pay for it.
Yeah.
We're paying for it in higher health care costs and so forth. So we need to make this change.
Yeah, I would imagine that there are elected officials who would like to have that kind of change you're talking about. There are some who maybe are beholden to special interests, and that's the only thing that keeps them in office. But I'm sure there must be others who would like to be relieved of the burden of endlessly fundraising and who actually want to serve the public interest and be responsive to voters.
I think that's true. We've been told privately by legislators that they really don't enjoy dialing for dollars. They would love to have that burden, lifted off them. I think maybe the scary part for some of them is, can this other public financing program really work? But the good news is that there are now 7 states around the country that do it and do it very well. In the state of Maine, 83% of their legislature is elected through public financing.
Yeah.
Connecticut established a new program just last year, and in the first year out, 3/4 of people running for their state legislature took advantage of this program. It really works.
Yeah. So I think that's exciting. Can we talk just a bit about the organizations that you're with? You're with Doctors for America, which is at www.dfa.org. And the other one that you're with is one that I've appreciated a lot, and that's Physicians for a National Health Plan,
Yes.
www.pnhp.org. Website has just a wealth of information, and a lot of the doctors who have been trying to testify to Congress and trying to get the word out to the general public and the news media have been with Physicians for a National Health Plan. So I'd like to put in a plug for that group, but I'm not even a doctor.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I think the quality of the data that comes out of that organization is unimpeachable.
Yeah.
Many of them have published in New England Journal of Medicine and Journal of the American Medical Association and the most prestigious peer-reviewed medical journals. So the information is as good as you'll find, and it's not guided by philosophy. The conclusions have come from careful study of the evidence. That's another thing that I think clouds our discussion, is we go on our beliefs rather than being open to information and learning. And PNHP has been, I think, excellent in educating doctors as well as the public as to what are the issues, where does the money come from, where does the money go. Doctors for America is a more recent organization that's trying to network and get more doctors to speak up about health reform, since the vast majority of physicians in the United States now favor health reform, and 59 to 60% think that a single payer type program would work in the U.S. and be very efficient.
And I want to put in a plug also for a related organization that I joined many years ago and have been supporting for a very long time, and that's Healthcare for All Washington. They've gone through several different names.
They do excellent work as well.
But they do great, and they're at www.healthcareforallwa.org. They have an office, an understaffed office in Seattle, but they also have a toll-free number that people can reach from elsewhere. So Healthcare for All Washington, those are good folks, and they'll have their annual meeting in middle of November in Seattle. You're with Washington Public Campaigns, which we have identified by name as really an outstanding organization. I've been supporting you folks for a long time, and very much appreciate the rich information at the website, the integrity with which you operate, and your way of getting out and connecting with the public and others. Can you tell us something briefly about what you've accomplished, what your organization's accomplished, what you're working on now, beyond what we've said already? We're running kind of tight on time, and we want to keep it brief.
Well, Glenn, essentially, we recognized early on that in order to make this change, where we achieve public financing of campaigns, again, as an option, it's not a mandate, we need many more of our friends and neighbors. We need the general public to understand that how this program can work and what it is. So we have a pretty active speakers bureau. We formed local chapters in a number of cities, Spokane, here in Olympia, Tacoma, and so forth. And we've got a very well-stocked website, if you will. There's a lot of information that we put on there, washclean.org. I think the bottom line is we recognize that it's going to take a citizens movement, a real grassroots movement, in order to bring about this kind of fundamental reform in how campaigns are financed.
Right.
The special interests will fight us on this.
Right.
So,
As they're doing on the healthcare issue, as they're doing on every other issue where people are trying to do the right thing, fix the climate or whatever.
Sure.
I appreciate the way that the two movements that you folks are with are forming kind of a strategic alliance,
Exactly.
especially in Washington, because you see the interconnections, and we've tried to lift those interconnections up on this program. But we think of the same thing. We could have guests here from the climate movement, people trying to protect our climate, and the oil companies are massively funding congressional campaigns and lobbyists and so forth, and public relations stuff to fool the public into thinking that burning fossil fuels is not causing climate problems. The coal companies and oil companies are doing that. And if you look at other issues, the banking industry is a major funder. One of the prominent senators was quoted as saying, the banks own Congress, just that bluntly. And so they're frustrating attempts to really reform our financial system, even after we've crashed it, and the banks are still, because of the power they have over congressional campaigns and presidential campaigns for that matter. So, I mean, the linkage that we're doing on the healthcare and campaign finance reform is actually multiplied across other topics as well. I wonder what would you like the public to do? I mean, we've laid out things that you folks and your organizations have been doing, and we've been urging public participation in these issues. Are there some suggestions for things that people could do?
well, I'll go first. I would say the short list is, become informed about these issues. Go to our website. We have information on what people can do. Invite a speaker to your local area. We actually, we need contributions as well to our organization. We are not well funded by any special interest.
And you're sure not getting government grants.
We sure are not. But I think that people need to become aware of the fundamental change that's really needed, and then talk to friends and neighbors so we spread the word. Once lawmakers know that the voters and the public will support campaign finance reform, that's how I think it'll come about. We may need a citizen initiative in this state, and we're actually preparing for that as a backup if we need to do it. That's how it was brought about in other states.
And there is a contact in Thurston County. People can email Thurston, the name of our county, at washclean.org, or they can locally here call 943-3070. Very briefly, how people could help really reform our healthcare system.
First, if you're approaching the issue from fear and anxiety, take a step back and a deep breath and consider that you've been scared by interests who want to maintain their power and influence. Then get some information. Open your mind to an important social experiment, which is what it will be, that nobody's going to forget about because it's so important. And then express your opinion respectfully to your neighbors and your politicians.
Okay, good. And all of these do require grassroots, people-based things, as you've said. I appreciate that. We want to thank our guests, Craig Salins from Washington Public Campaigns and Dr. David Bond from Physicians for a National Health Plan. We want to thank all the folks who've been watching. As we said at the beginning of this program, it's no surprise that people in the United States pay twice as much per capita as people in other modern industrial countries for health care, but we're only 37th in health outcomes in this country compared to the rest of the world. And it's because we have not designed a healthcare system that's designed primarily to produce good healthcare. We've designed a system that is designed to be profitable. And the way that we do election campaigns got that system in place and keeps it in place. Solutions, yeah, Medicare for everybody, a single payer health plan, that would work. And a solution is public financing of electoral campaigns, get the big money out of our democracy and let the people have a voice again. Insurance companies have bribed Congress through millions of dollars in campaign contributions, and so Congress really does pay a lot more attention to the special interests than to the ordinary people. There are bills in Congress to reform that. The Fair Elections Now Act would do that. We have opportunities at the state and local level. We have single payer organizing happening at the national, state, and local level as well. So we can take advantage of this teachable moment when we recognize that our healthcare system is broken, our national finance system is broken, our methods of protecting the environment are broken, our election campaign system is broken, and we can fix all of those things. For information about a variety of issues, contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at 360-491-9093. We're all one human family and we all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs exactly what you have to offer. Thanks.